All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing our look at the Dragoon class from the 5th edition D&D cross Final Fantasy 14 classes and races compendium. If you're not aware of what that is, there's actually a little link in the description below. Take you right to the Reddit where you can download the most recent updated version of it, along with, talk to other people that use it, see some of the other things that fans are interested in. There's even a reworked version of the Dragoon class that was written by someone different, not Soren, the person that actually wrote the whole compendium. Someone else has their own take on the Dragoon. So definitely check out that stuff. I'm not going to be talking about the remake that was posted recently on there, mostly because it's not part of this thing. And if I start doing every single version of every single class that has ever appeared, I will never be done with this. So I'm just going to focus on what we have here. So that means today we are looking at another subclass of the Dragoon, the Dragonheart. Now, before we get started, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this stuff. It really makes a massive difference, especially for a channel as small as mine. The more subscriptions I get and the more likes I get on the videos, the more of a chance that people that aren't coming here specifically for me or because of one of the links I personally shared increases exponentially as you do those things. So do that. Also, hitting the bell icon and turning notifications on is another thing YouTube uses to weight my videos in recommended feeds, which is where the majority of most channels' traffic comes from, is from recommendations through YouTube. So the more you guys do that stuff, the better it is for my channel, and the better chance that we'll be able to get more people into stuff like this. So that being said, let's jump into the Dragonheart. Now, quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition, every class is designed to be played very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, they have these things that we call defining features. They're either abilities that are exclusive to the class or abilities that other classes may get, but the specific class we're talking about gets to use that ability in a unique way or gets to use it much, much earlier, something like that. And in order for something to be a defining feature, it needs to show up within the first 2 levels. So what are the defining features of the Dragoon? Well, the first defining feature they have is what's called Dragoon's Trance. It is basically something that you activate as a bonus action. It lasts for a minute, so effectively it lasts for a single combat. What it basically does is it improves your ability to jump. Now, the way it's worded in there is a little bit confusing and conflicting as far as how D&D 5th edition is written. But the way I think it's intended to work is it allows you to jump at least 15 feet on a high jump and at least 30 feet on a long jump, which is a pretty significant increase. It effectively kind of works like a concentration spell, which will actually come in, will be kind of important. I haven't really mentioned it here because it doesn't specifically say you have to concentrate on it. But it does come into play for this is a subclass. So effectively, it ends early if you're knocked unconscious, or you can end the trance as a bonus action, and there are a few abilities that will end the trance for you because of how powerful they are. Dragoon's Trance has a limited number of uses. You start out with 2 uses. It gets up to 6 uses by 17th level. The next defining feature is one of the main things you're going to be doing as a Dragoon is jumping. Dragoons have... in Final Fantasy, have always had this ability to jump, which allowed them to leap into the air and then do extra damage. All the way except for the very first Dragoon that was ever introduced, which was Ricard Highwind in Final Fantasy II. Starting with Final Fantasy III, jump was a Dragoon thing, and they have a version of it in this class. It's called Jump, surprisingly enough. And effectively, you have to have your Dragoon's Trance on to do it. But what it does is it lets you jump and hit a target either 15 feet in the air, or up to 15 feet in the air, or up to 30 feet away from you. You just jump. They have to make a saving throw against your jump DC, which is proficiency bonus plus your strength modifier. And on a hit, they take damage. On a miss, they take half damage. So it is guaranteed damage. And other than requiring the Dragoon's Trance, there's nothing that limits your ability to use it. There's not like a set number of charges for it. So that is one of the things that Dragoons will be doing a lot of when they use their action. The other defining feature you get is called Lancet, though I have already recommended it should be called Lancet Thrust, because thrust attacks are the other thing that makes Dragoons different. Basically, Lancet Thrust, as I have recommended it be called, basically allows you to make a melee attack as an action, and you get half the amount of damage that you did on that attack back as hit points. So it's a way for you to regain some hit point and get a little bit of survivability. You do have a limitation. It's tied to your strength modifier. So you can only use it up to 5 times if you have a 20 strength per long rest. But overall, that's kind of how the Dragoon works. Dragoon is the only melee weapon, or the only weapon class I'm aware of that doesn't get extra attack. So if they just use the attack action, they're only going to get a regular attack. But if they replace their attack action with either jump for the guaranteed damage and mobility, or one of their thrust attacks, because they get other ones, for the different effects the thrusts can do, that is effectively how you will be playing your Dragoon. Is in combat, you'll be choosing between jumping and thrusting, and the various effects both of those abilities get as they are upgraded throughout the class. So, how does the Dragon Heart deal with those things? Well, I'm glad you asked, person that I created in my mind. Let's dive into the Dragon Heart. First thing they get is called Breath of the Dragon. Right at 3rd level, as a bonus action, you may expend a use of your Dragoon's Trance in order to cast the Dragon's Breath spell on yourself at 2nd level. As you gain levels in the Dragoon class, the level that you cast the spell on you increases. At 9th level, you cast it at 3rd. 17th, you cast this at 4th level. So, Breath of the Dragon is a really interesting spell. Effectively, as a bonus action, you touch a creature, which in this case, it is limited to touching yourself to cast the spell. Get your dirty minds out of the gutter. And what it does is, for a minute, you can use your action to make a 15-foot cone attack that does 3d6 damage of a type you choose when you cast this as a spell. When you cast it at higher levels, that 3d6 gets increased by 1 per level. So at 3rd level, you do 4d6. At 4th level, you do 5d6, which is a decent chunk of change, especially since it's a cone attack, not a single attack. And because it's a saving throw, you do, I believe you still do, half damage on... I'm actually going to look it up right now before I say the wrong thing. Come on, computer. There we go. Yeah, and half as much damage on a successful one. So, it is guaranteed to do damage, which is always nice. It is group damage, which is always nice. And it gets more powerful as you level up. It's tied to your... it's tied to your Dragoon trances. So, you're generally going to be choosing between one or the other at this point. And again, despite the fact that it doesn't state it, later on in this class, it's going to imply that Dragoon's Trance is effectively a concentration spell. So we'll deal with that in a little bit. But that means basically Breath of the Dragon is going to be replacing your jump for the Dragon Heart. So they lose a little bit of mobility for, again, they still get guaranteed damage, but it's area damage now. Which means the Dragon Heart is going to be very, very effective when you're fighting multiple enemies, which in 5th edition is almost a guarantee because of how the action economy works. Even if you have a really, really powerful, legendary boss creature kind of thing that you're throwing at them, 5th edition is still designed around the idea of the action economy, and even with legendary actions and the things like that, most quote-unquote boss encounters are going to involve at least a few minions, simply because a single creature cannot outlast an entire party of 5 or 6 or more sometimes characters all having actions to be able to use against them. So, as much as you might think of, well, then I'm never going to use it if we're in like a quote unquote boss encounter, you probably will, because again, to try this one more time. Guaranteed damage is always is useful. The fact that you actually get a few different things that you get to choose. You get to choose acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison. So because you get to choose which damage type it is, there's a lot of benefit to Breath of the Dragon that you're not going to get from Jump, despite the fact that you're actually doing a similar amount of damage. The difference being area damage versus with Jump, there's a melee attack built into it. It does it does your weapon damage plus some extra damage. So technically Jump does slightly more damage in the attack. Breath of the Dragon does more damage simply because it can hit multiple foes. So if you are really only facing one creature, you're still going to be a little bit better off with Jump than you are with Breath of the Dragon. But as long as there's at least one other creature, Breath of the Dragon is going to do work. Cool. So, going to 7th level, you get Dragon Sense. You've gained 30 feet of blind sight and 60 feet of dark sight. And additionally, during battle as a bonus action, you may make a perception check. So this is something that a lot of players are unaware of because I think a lot of DMs are unaware of it as well. A perception check in combat is an action. And a lot of people ask, well, why would you ever make a perception check in combat? Well, if you have either an invisible or a hidden enemy for whatever reason, let's say maybe the enemy has some levels of a rogue, and so they can hide as a bonus action, or they have the invisibility or greater invisibility spell where you can't see them. Any ability that requires line of sight, which includes most attacks, you're going to have to make a perception check in order to know where they are enough that you can attack them with something. Now, there's nuance and stuff like that, but that's kind of what it is. I know a lot of DMs will kind of ignore that and make players make perception checks when the invisibility spell is cast or something like that. That is actually against the rules. If someone hides in combat, it goes up against passive perception as far as who can and can't see them. So that in itself is kind of useful if you are dealing with foes that use invisibility. Which in tier 2 content, which is 5th through to 10th level, it's not incredibly common, but that is where you first start seeing the invisibility spell being used and things like that. Once you get into tier 3 and tier 4 content, invisible enemies become a much bigger deal, but you also have a lot more ways to deal with invisible enemies. So it's kind of, there are uses for it. As far as the 30 feet of blind sight and 60 feet of, they say dark sight. Dark sight isn't a thing in 5th edition. The correct term is dark vision. So I'm assuming that's just a typo, because the correct term for blind sight is blind sight. Though the way you would phrase it to keep with all of the features of 5th edition is you gain 30 feet. You don't gain 30 feet of blind sight. You can use blind sight to a range of 30 feet is how you would generally phrase it. That's just a syntax thing. Like I've mentioned before, it's best to use the same syntax simply because anytime you change syntax, even if it's supposed to mean this is the same thing, people will argue, well, the syntax is different, so we have to interpret it differently. So beyond that, blind sight is remarkably useful because it has been ruled that blind sight effectively lets you, quote unquote, see anything that would normally require vision. So any spells that require line of sight, the ability to get, or the fact that you have to make attacks at disadvantage if you can't physically see the target. Even if you know where they are, you will still make attacks at disadvantage if you can't see them. Blind sight fixes that. A lot of creatures that have blind sight will actually say how they get their blind sight, like bats in D&D. Use echolocation for their blind sight. So it specifically states the blind condition doesn't affect bats because they can use their echolocation. However, the deaf condition would make it impossible for them to be able to see because they have to use their ears. This doesn't tell you where you get the blind sight from, which is the only thing I would mention here is specifically clarifying, what gives you the blind sight. Is it enhanced hearing? Is it enhanced smell? You can just smell where people are, which actually kind of fits in with the dragon theme. It's not going to be something like you can feel their vibrations in the floor, because that's actually a different type of sight called tremor sense, which is very, very clearly defined, whereas blind sight, even just the magical ability to see without the use of your eyes is considered blind sight. Blind sight is kind of a blanket term for a bunch of different senses that the effect is the same. You can see without using physical sight. So that's the only thing I would change about this is changing the wording so it fits with everything else, and then specifically stating where does the blind sight come from, because that's going to change how enemies are going to deal with it. Again, if Dragoons are a class, which effectively means there are more than one. Enemies will have come into contact with Dragoons before, depending on how the lore is concerned. And so the method of their blind sight would be something that very intelligent enemies would be aware of. And more feral creatures would have learned how to deal with that to a point. So that is an important part to limit a little bit. Otherwise, just being able to always see within the 30 feet is incredibly useful. That effectively would be what's called true sight. and blind sight, I guess, because true sight does require vision. It technically there isn't a thing in D&D currently that allows you to just see everything with no limitations within a set range. So if that's what this is, which kind of is how it's described here, is you can just see. The only thing that will block blind sight is 100% cover because you can't see through walls. But that's the only thing that blocks it. So, yeah, that'd be the only change. But yeah, blind sight is really, really useful. And again, will definitely help the Dragoon with, first of all, being able to navigate in the dark. Dark vision is useful for that. Blind sight is even more useful. And then, yeah, dealing with any creatures that get a little bit tricksy are always going to be useful for Dragon Sense. Cool. So, at 11th level, you get Blood of the Dragon. When you use your Dragoon's Trance ability, you gain 10 temporary hit points, and the spellcasting concentration restrictions of Dragoon's Trance is lifted from the Dragon's Breath spell. The temporary hit points fade when your trance ends. So, this is poorly worded to say the least. First things first, thus far there has been no reference to Dragoon's Trance being a concentration spell. Now that it's specifically stated here that it is a concentration spell, we know that it's supposed to be a concentration spell, which means it interferes with any sort of other concentration spell, like Dragon's Breath, which is a concentration spell. This effectively means you can have Dragoon's Trance and Blood of the Dragon on simultaneously. Well, how does that work when, Breath of the Dragon, I mean. How does that work when Dragon's Breath is effectively replacing Jump, which is what you use your Dragoon's Trance for? Well, first things first, there's always the fact that at 9th level you get High Jump, which is very, very useful for single to the target. So if you are doing a combat where sometimes you can get stuff into a Dragon's Breath cone and sometimes you can't, having that ability to use High Jump, which is requires Dragoon's Trance, is useful. But the other thing that's useful, which again is still very confusingly worded and needs to be fixed in the base class, but if they take the suggestions that I mentioned, it gives you the extra movement ability of those jump abilities in when you're using Dragoon's Trance. So Blood of the Dragon effectively gives you some temporary hit points, which is always nice. But in addition to that, gives you significantly more movement. You know, being able to jump 30 feet means you can avoid difficult terrain because you're not traveling over it, or damaging to the terrain. If someone casts the Thorns spell, for every 5 feet you move through an area with thorns, you take damage. So Blood of the Dragon can allow you to be able to jump instead of having to move. And it also can get around other things, like things that lower your movement, since, again, Dragoon's Trance is supposed to mean... oh, and I got it wrong. Your jump height is a minimum of 30 feet, and your jump distance is a minimum of 15 feet. So you can jump up to 30 feet high or 15 feet forward. So if it's worded correctly, it can get around things like Ray of Frost, which reduces your movement, or other spells or effects that reduce your movement speed. Jump will be able to get around that if it works the way I think it's intended, as opposed to the way it's written. So yeah, you know, Blood of the Dragon, it sounds like something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense until you understand that the hypermobility aspect of Dragoon's Trance is there. It does mean, because Breath of the Dragon requires a Dragoon's Trance, and then Dragoon's Trance itself requires a Dragoon's Trance. Double dipping requires you to use twice as many of your limited resource, but I think the benefit for that is pretty definite. You know, being able to jump and use the other abilities of being a Dragoon, because most of them require the Dragoon's Trance. while you also can breathe your breath attack is really useful. So, yeah. Finally, 15th level, you get Life of the Dragon. While you are under the effect of both Dragoon's Trance and Breath of the Dragon, you are able to combine these powers to fight like a legendary dragon. You may use the effects of the Dragon Breath spell as a bonus action on your turn. This is where it becomes slightly unbalanced, because by the time you get to 15th level, you are casting it at the third level, which is 46 damage, which means by being able to use it as both your action and your bonus action, that is 8d6 damage. That pretty much, and it's guaranteed damage. That pretty much outclasses any ability, including the high jump. The high jump at that point only does 66 damage, and if they make their save, you do none of that. And it also requires you, the enemy, to have at least 5 feet of space above them. A high jump doesn't do its damage until the beginning of your next turn. Like, Life of the Dragon becomes really, really powerful right as you get it, and basically means you will never be using any of the rest of the abilities of the Dragoon, because this outclasses all of them. And then you get to 17th level, which means you're casting it at 4th level, which means it is now 5d6 damage, which if you use it twice, it means 10d6 to the damage, meaning it outclasses everything every single Dragoon can do. Yeah, overall, this one is broken a little bit, and there's just one change to make to turn it into something really, really interesting that actually folds itself into the class, as opposed to just ditching everything in the base class so that all you ever do is your Dragon Breath. And that is, add the line at the end. You can still use, you may still only use the effect of the Dragon Breath spell once per turn. What that means is, yeah, you can use it as a bonus action, but you have to choose either to use it as a bonus action or as your action, which means you will still be able to use other things, like your thrust attacks, which is a defining feature of the class. Once you get Life of the Dragon, with the way it's written here, you will never use a thrust attack again, because you will always do less damage than your breath attack. And you will never use your jump or your high jump again, because you will always do more damage with Life of the Dragon. And any subclass ability that makes you forget and never use all of the defining features of the class is a bad subclass ability, because now it's effectively turned into its own class. And you don't want that. You know, part of the reason you wanted to be a Dragoon is you want to jump. Like, that is a defining feature of the class. And now, anytime you use the jump, it's going to be less beneficial for you. Especially since you can already get the distance aspects of it from using Dragoon's Trance. So that would be my one clarification on this, is you can only use one, or you can only use it once per turn, which would encourage Dragoons to use their defining features. It does still mean that this is a pretty powerful class. Once you get into that, for a 15th level ability, that is still really, really powerful, but it's not nearly as powerful once you put the once per turn limitation on it. So that would be my recommendation for Life of the Dragon. Is, as it's written, it's way too powerful. But if you make that little change, it becomes much more of an interesting thing that you can use, that gives you choices, as opposed to overriding your choice, because every other choice you can make is always going to be a worse choice. So, final thoughts. Overall, I like the Dragonheart. It is much more focused on just dealing lots of damage compared to like the Dragon Slayer, where you got the Dragonlance thrust that allows you to be able to hit targets you normally couldn't hit. And then Dragon's Bane, where it gives you kind of a choice between evasion, a defensive skill, or a offensive skill if they take the suggestions I make. That is the Dragon Slayer has a much more kind of much more diverse set of things, where they can be a little bit of control or they can still be a damage dealer. Dragonheart is mostly just increasing your ability to damage, specifically over an area, but even as you get to higher levels, even then, you're just doing a ton of damage with that breath attack, and the only thing you're really worrying about is ensuring that you're not hitting your allies with it, unless they have something like evasion, where it's not really going to hurt them that much. Yeah, otherwise, like I said, I think it's an interesting class. Life of the Dragon needs to be trimmed down a bit, and Dragon Sense definitely needs to have the source of the blind sight, how they get the blind sight defined, just so that there are counters to it, and they're not just this omnipresent being for 30 feet. But other than that, it's great. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. As always, just a quick reminder, like, subscribe, turn notifications on. They really do help with discoverability on these videos. In the comments down below, which also helps with the discoverability, let me know what you guys think specifically of blind sight as far as it relates to the Dragoon. Do you think the Dragoon develops a hypersensitive smell? Do you think the Dragoon develops echolocation effectively, where they can hear their enemies, every aspect of their enemies, even their heartbeats within the 30 feet? Or do you think it's something completely different? Do you think it's magic-based? Do you think it's more akin to Tremor Sense and should be changed to Tremor Sense? What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.